Senator Pratt.
Mr Acting Deputy President, I'm delighted today to rise to support the bills before us, which represent the second, third and fourth tranches of what have been significant reforms to Australia's anti-dumping regime. And they are, in fact, the most comprehensive reforms to Australia's anti-dumping regime in over 10 years. And they are the result of a comprehensive inquiry by the Productivity Commission and take account of the views of state and territory governments and indeed Senate committee reports. The consultation was in fact quite lengthy, and I'm pleased to know that a broad range of views were sought and listened to from key industry players that have been affected by dumping in Australia, right through to major unions. So I think that we can be confident that the reforms that we have before the chamber are based on the needs of all sections of the Australian economy. As we know, the Australian economy is in a strong position under the stewardship of the Labor government, and I congratulate the Treasurer and the Finance Minister on this. Indeed, they've announced that the Australian economy is now the 12th largest in the world. We've leapt 3 places, surpassing economies as large and diverse as South Korea, Spain and Mexico, and I think it's testament to good financial and economic management. But as these bills highlight, there are challenges facing our economy, and as I've said before in this place, the health of our manufacturing sector is perhaps the greatest of those challenges. So that is why I'm pleased to be here in this chamber taking action to ensure that dumping pressures are relieved on the Australian manufacturing sector, to be one of the planks that help ensure we have a healthy manufacturing sector into the future. So today we're looking at the Customs Amendment Anti-Dumping Improvement Bill No. 2 and Amendments No. 1. And I'd like to begin by dismissing the idea that anti-dumping laws are merely a reflection of protectionist sentiments in this country. It is simply not the case. Anti-dumping laws are not about protectionism. They are very much about recognising the fact that overseas companies can and do engage in anti-competitive practices by dumping their products here in Australia at prices well below their actual value or cost of production. Dumping has had serious consequences for the Australian economy, and because Australian companies can't compete with these artificially low prices, we see the results in cutting back jobs and training, or sometimes even the closure of shops entirely. Losing manufacturing jobs reduces the diversity and resilience of our economy, and we must do everything reasonable to combat these anti-competitive practices. I want to add that it's notable that the prices of these dumped goods are often artificially lower due to foreign government subsidies and ownership, precisely the type of government economic intervention that opponents of anti-dumping abhor. And I would note in that context, I suppose, the significant challenges, for example, to the Australian steel industry, while we note that countries that we compete with, for example, China, are building massive reserves of manufactured steel that are building up in that country, and we need to be mindful. We need to be mindful that that such products aren't dumped here in Australia, artificially and falsely competing with Australian steel. And I don't believe it has, and I'll take that interjection, Mr Acting Deputy President, it doesn't have anything to do with the carbon price. It's got to do with the artificial interference with what are state-owned enterprises, where they won't cease production based on market forces, but for their own reasons will continue to choose to create production. For example, they might just want to retain local employment. And it does artificially impact on the price of products. So the problem with arguments advanced by opponents of anti-dumping provisions is, I think, that they want to have it both ways. Often we've heard them say we want to oppose anti-dumping laws as unnecessary government intervention, without actually recognising the fact that such laws are necessitated by overseas government intervention and the serious consequences for Australian industries and jobs. Opponents will often tell us the benefits to consumers that are in cheap dumped products outweigh the benefit of anti-dumping laws. But with all respect to those commentators, I disagree. It has no regard for the long-term health of Australia's manufacturing sector and, by proxy, the Australian economy. It has no regard for the damage that dumping can do to jobs and livelihood. It doesn't matter how cheap products are at the supermarket when you are unemployed. It doesn't matter how cheap products are if we lose our manufacturing industry and its strong multiplier effect on the economy. And it doesn't matter how cheap those products are now when they get more expensive once domestic competition has been driven out. Anti-dumping laws make sure that the prices people pay for goods both now and in the future are fair and competitive. So when we get policy settings right, anti-dumping laws play an important part in ensuring that we can live in an economy that is fair as well as free. The importance of anti-dumping laws are understood by stakeholders right throughout the economy, but is particularly understood by those who are in the front line of protecting workers from job losses. As Dave Oliver notes, the former National Secretary of the Australian Manufacturing Workers Union, the practice of illegal dumping has the potential to destroy manufacturing jobs around the country. And importantly, this is a view not just held by unions. It is understood by those businesses who work in the manufacturing sector. Manufacturing Australia, a business coalition of Australian manufacturing companies, in their March 2012 communiqué, state Australia's manufacturers cannot continue to withstand the unfair trade that leads directly to the loss of jobs, loss of Australian capability and vulnerability to price increases. So this is why I am pleased to be able to speak in support of these bills today. It is fundamentally about protecting the health of our economy and the jobs of Australian manufacturing workers. It isn't, however, a matter of ideology. It is a matter of doing what is needed to both support both workers and businesses here in this country, and I'm very pleased to see the opposition's support for these reforms. To the substance of the bill, they make several major reforms to our existing anti-dumping laws, and I'm just going to comment on just a few of those reforms. First, the bills clarify the powers of the CEO, Customs and Border Protection, and of the Minister, and, for example, determining whether a countervailable subsidy has been received, or in determining the amount of a countervailable subsidy when the parties under investigation fail to provide information to Customs or significantly impede Customs investigations. So what happens in these circumstances is that the bills make it clear that the CEO of Customs and Border Protection and the Minister have express power to take all facts available into account. And I think it's important that the Minister has these powers and retains them into the future. So, given that it is in the interests of companies who engage in dumping practices to cover up the existence or extent of their unfair trading, it is sensible to make it easier for our authorities to decide whether or not dumping has occurred. Secondly, the bills remove the need for a separate review of anti-dumping measures and continuation of inquiries when those inquiries occur in close proximity to each other. And this is an important distinction from the way the bill has Act has previously operated. For those unfamiliar, the Customs Act, a review of measures under Division 5 of the Act, allows the CEO to recommend to the Minister a range of options for changing anti-dumping measures. These include recalculating the levels of duty where there is an application that relevant factors have changed or the measures are no longer warranted. So a continuation of inquiry under Division 6A, which is an inquiry into whether or not anti-dumping measures should continue beyond their expiry date. So you can see that this is an important improvement on how the Act has to date operated. Because currently, anti-dumping measures cannot be changed as a part of a decision to continue those measures. Instead, a separate review has had to be conducted, and that's been quite inefficient. So, in considering whether to continue anti-dumping measures, the Minister should have the flexibility to continue and change those measures. That is precisely what the bills before us provide for. With the passage of these bills, Customs will be able to recalculate the level of duties of an anti-dumping measure during a continuation inquiry rather than going through two separate processes. And this is clearly going to streamline the process, meaning quicker outcomes for all interested parties. Third, the bills implement the recommendation of the International Trade Remedies Forum to remove the current limitation to the inclusion of profit when calculating the normal value of a good in its country of origin in certain circumstances. And this, I think, is going to improve the effectiveness of the particular market situation provisions in the Customs Act by providing greater flexibility for Customs to more accurately determine the value of normal value of goods. Fourth, these bills allow different forms of interim duty to be applied from those currently used. Fifth, these bills insert a new division into the Customs Act that will allow Australian industry to apply for an anti-circumvention inquiry. And I think the circumvention issue is important because these kinds of behaviours take a number of forms, but they're always strategies used by exporters and importers to avoid paying the full payment of dumping duties. So strategies like this are again anti-competitive and unfair. It's essentially where companies are exploiting loopholes in the existing laws to avoid having to import goods at what should be the proper market value for those goods. This new division will close loopholes, meaning that Australian industry can be more confident that imported goods are subject to the same level playing field that they are. These bills make other worthwhile changes to our anti-dumping regime, including a new appeals process and strengthening the provisions that address non-cooperation. So what I've done today is lay out just a few of the changes and how those changes are responding to particular problems within our existing anti-dumping regime, and indeed they're responding to the specific concerns of the manufacturing industry. They will, I think, create a better and more effective Customs Act. What they are also about, though, is providing certainty for business. These changes have been broadly welcomed by business and unions alike. It's because they provide certainty and better service for businesses. They do this by streamlining our anti-dumping processes, providing anti-dumping decisions more quickly, such as by allowing a variation of anti-dumping measures in continuation inquiries, as I've previously highlighted. They do this by providing better access to the anti-dumping system and by improving the quality of decision-making. They do this by making our system more consistent with those of other countries and by encouraging stronger compliance. They are sensible reforms that will modernise our anti-dumping laws, helping to level the playing field for Australia's manufacturers. So with this in mind, I'd like to briefly mention, as I have done many times in this place, about the need to do more to promote the health of our manufacturing sector in our country. We have a high Australian dollar, a resources boom that has drained many of the skills out of the manufacturing sector. So we must ensure that there will be an industry after the peak of the mining industry has passed. In WA, our manufacturing sector is grappling much more with a lack of supply than with dumping practices. And that's why I will continue to advocate for stronger commitments to local content in large projects, because it is one of the best ways that we can ensure the benefits of this once-in-a-lifetime mining boom continue into the future. In tandem with a plan for local content, we must have laws that ensure that local content can compete fairly with overseas content. That is what these bills do. Finally, I want to return to my original point about anti-dumping laws being a necessary response to unfair international business practices. The Australian government takes open, international trade very seriously. We want trade in this country to be vigorous, and we want our trading partners to trust our anti-dumping measures. That's why these bills have been carefully constructed. They've been carefully constructed to satisfy our obligations under the World Trade Organisation obligations. Indeed, Section 1, Article 6 of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, within that section, it says, dumping by of which products of one country are introduced to the commerce of another country at less than the normal value of products is to be condemned if it causes or threatens material injury to an established industry or materially retards the establishment of a domestic industry. Section 2 of Article 6 then specifically endorses the levying of an anti-dumping duty as a remedy for this unfair trading practice. So it's clear that anti-dumping systems are regarded as not only acceptable, but in fact as necessary by the international community. Why is this so? It is so because countries around the world recognise that dumping does occur and that it has serious consequences for economies, and it has serious consequences for free and fair trade. The government estimates in its report Streamlining Australia's Anti-Dumping System that more than 90 countries have anti-dumping systems. The Productivity Commission further notes that the majority of World Trade Organisation members now have a system in place. So by passing these bills, we're not doing anything unusual in the global economy, except in building an anti-dumping system that is world's best practice. Australia is a nation of trade. And for our entire history, we have relied on our exports of high-value manufacturing products through to our primary resources in agriculture and mining. It is not in our interest to encourage countries to throw up unnecessary barriers to trade, but we do want an international trade system that is fair. It is a core labour value that distinguishes us, I think, from those opposite of the chamber. We believe that economies should create opportunities for our citizens and for our nation's businesses, but we believe that those opportunities should be available under fair conditions. Unfortunately, though, some of our competitors have come to look on Australia as an easy dumping ground, and they're not playing under fair conditions. And as my briefing with the steel industry this morning highlighted, we're considered a dumping ground because we pay our bills on time. It's a desirable place to dump your goods because, you know, you're going to get paid for them. It's where we've got good ports, we've got good access to infrastructure, it's fairly easy to import things. So, you know, when you need to get rid of goods quickly and dispose of them on a market, Australia has been seen as a desirable place to do that. So in the face of unfair trading practices like these, governments like this one must act, and act we have done. We're acting to level the playing field for Australia's manufacturers. That's why we need robust anti-dumping laws. If the result of these laws is the protection of Australian jobs, then we need make no apology. I cannot see a reason other than fringe ideology as to why anyone would oppose such measures, but we do find commentators that occasionally do. Labor's reforms will make our laws some of the best in the world. They're based on broad consultations with industry and unions alike. These reforms will make our anti-dumping system more sensible, efficient and better resourced, and they will satisfy our international obligations. Labor fights for jobs. It fights for fairness. It fights for a stronger economy, and I am very proud to stand with government that is delivering on those values yet again.